One of the things I've always appreciated about the events organized by Cambridge Ukrainian Studies, Cambridge Polish Studies, is their polyphony, by which I don't just mean different opinions, but people coming. It's not just academics talking to academics. It's a well-established tradition that we have journalists, we have people in NGOs, activists, and so on. And this panel embodies that, which is educative for all of us and a good thing. So back to universities, and Professor Andrzej Szeptycki from the University of Warsaw, who will talk about contemporary and future challenges for Polish-Ukrainian relations.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I was asked, or I've proposed to speak about, as it was said, contemporary and future challenges for Polish-Ukrainian relations, which is in fact much easier than to speak about what to do in future to make it better. It's easier to define the problems than to say how to solve them, although it's somehow related. I would like to mention 5 of them, starting from more general and maybe more well-known, and ending with some more local in time. First problem, speaking also about Poland and Germany and so on. First problem we have to deal with since 1991 till today and also in future is a very asymmetrical character of Polish-Ukrainian relations. And this is very important to keep that in mind. We had different starting points in 1989, 1991. Poland was a formally independent country. It was a nation state, dependent or not on Soviet Union. Ukraine was even not officially an independent country, although it was at UN, of course. It was, or it is, a nation state in statu nascendi, which is still in the process of nation building, one way or the other. And this also, of course, influences our positions today. Poland is in EU and NATO peacefully. Ukraine underwent a revolution of dignity. Now it's in fact in state of war with Russia. Well, for several years probably it will remain out of EU, not to speak about NATO. In this context, it is difficult, and that's the main point, to construct a strategic partnership. It is difficult to cooperate closely with somebody else who sits in a different car. France and Germany were able, or have been able, to construct very deep and close relations since the end of the Second World War, because basically they were in the same car. They were within NATO, within European communities, there was the communist Soviet threat, and so on. And only in these conditions, they were able to undergo the process of reconciliation and so on. We are not, unfortunately, France and Germany. And a very good example is, well, the infamous Polish or EU visa regime for the Ukrainians, okay? France and Germany now are able to create common consulates or to represent themselves in different international forums, a German representing France and vice versa. We have the visa regime for the Ukrainians. Another thing connected with this asymmetry is that sometimes our Polish experience does not really fit Ukrainian reality. We tend very often to consider, especially we in Poland, Poland as an example for Ukraine. And also Ukrainians do that. The problem is that sometimes it does work, sometimes it doesn't work. I'm very often, especially now, asked by the Ukrainian journalists how Poles assess the reform of the local government and regional territorial government in Poland. My answer is they don't care. This happened 25 years ago. I can tell you maybe how they access, how it works now. But I mean, I was 13 years old when the local territorial governments were created in 1990. So it doesn't make sense to ask such questions. So Polish transformation experience doesn't work always. Second problem we have, it was already mentioned, is of course history. I would say, and here I agree with my predecessor, that the main problem with history is even not that we have a different vision of history. The problem is that an average Ukrainian and average Pole have a different approach towards the existence of common history. Poles are very much sensitive about Polish-Ukrainian history, while most of the Ukrainians, especially those coming from central and eastern Ukraine, they basically don't care about it. Simplifying very much, 5 years ago, if you would have a meeting between Tusk and Tymoshenko, Tusk will speak about Volhynia and Tymoshenko will speak about visa regime. And this is the main problem. Of course, this is a little bit changing. Certainly in Poland, there are groups of people who use, or political circles, who use history as an instrument against Ukraine. In Ukraine, the situation is somehow different. I would say that basically Ukrainians have a problem with their history on their own because they cannot fully agree on their historical heroes and so on. They have also problems with history, Ukrainian-Russian problems. And these internal problems and Ukrainian-Russian problems very often strike Polish-Ukrainian relations. This was the case of Bandera becoming the hero of Ukraine under Yushchenko. It was not done against Poland, I suppose, but still it had a huge impact on our bilateral relations. This is the same about this year's law on the recognition of UPA as fighters for independence of Ukraine. Well, they were fighting for independence of Ukraine. I mean, historically, it's a fact. Still, for Poland, this becomes a huge problem. However, as I've said, this may change in future, with Ukraine trying to implement a more coherent policy of nation building, policy based strongly on Western Ukrainian experience. Here, Ukraine may come to the same point sometimes as Poland. I mean, using history as a tool also against Poland. 2 or 3 days ago, I've seen on the 5th channel a long documentary film on the Vistula action, as an example. Vistula action, which basically is not a, let's say, huge problem for most of the Ukrainians living in Ukraine, because they were not affected by that. Now they will know more about that. Third problem, third challenge we may face, this is crisis. Crisis on both sides. I mean, either in Ukraine or in Poland or in EU. Well, about Ukraine, it is evident. We've seen that under Yushchenko, Poland was very much favorable for Ukraine after the year 2004. And then, as the whole EU, we've entered the period of Ukraine fatigue in 2007, 2008. Because after 3 or 4 years of the Orange team, we've understood that basically nothing changes. And if Poroshenko, Yatsenyuk, and the others do not implement coherent reforms, if there is any kind of third Maidan, this Ukraine fatigue may come back to Poland. However, and this is also a problem for Poland and for Ukraine, we may be affected by EU weakness. Grexit, Islamic State, immigration, Russia aggressive policy towards whatever, the Baltic states. Each of these elements makes EU and also Poland in a way less interested in Ukraine? Well, we cannot, in fact, blame the Italians for being very nervous about the immigration in the Mediterranean. We do not receive here in UK, in Poland, in Ukraine, thousands of people coming illegally each day. The problem is we have to find within EU a balance of interests, a compromise, okay? I mean, we can support Italians about immigration. We don't want really to receive their immigrants, hoping they will support our Ukrainian partners. The problem is that more immigrants come, less Ukraine matters. If EU becomes weaker, well, it becomes weaker. It has become weaker these last 10 years. This may potentially lead, first, to the decrease of EU interest in Ukraine, second, to the decrease of Ukraine interest in EU. You've said that, yeah? In Ukraine, people in the Maidan protesting for Europe. In UK, the Independent Party going up. At the moment, some Ukrainians may also understand that EU is not anymore what it used to be. And Poland, in this context, would be unable to effectively support Ukraine. Because for Poland, EU membership and EU instruments are the main, if not the only, effective instrument to support Ukrainian partner. Because we as a country, we are too weak, too poor to act alone without EU support. Fourth point, connected with the previous one, the extremism on the both sides. Well, in Ukraine, potentially, if any more extremist movements come to power, it means end of reforms, if there are any, potentially anti-Polish historical discourse, also potentially anti-EU discourse, especially related to the implementation of the DCFTA, which may not work, which may work but bring in a short term negative results. But what's more important, I think, especially now, Jarosław Krycyk mentioned it in a way, is the problem of the rising extremism in Poland. This is the problem of our Paweł Kukiz, you might have heard of, who got 20% in the presidential elections, although he has no political program. This is also the problem of our openly pro-Russian, anti-European, anti-Ukrainian Janusz Korwin-Mikke, who got some 7%, I suppose, in last European elections. In Poland, most of the extremist political forces tend to adopt an anti-Ukrainian and a rather pro-Russian discourse. I'm not saying they are all on the Russian payroll, although some people esteem that most of the extremist anti-European movements in Europe are. Moreover, these, let's say, populist extremist movements may also adopt an anti-immigration political discourse. For the moment, we don't have politically in Poland a problem with the Ukrainian immigrants. And it's a huge success if you look at the immigration experience of some other European countries, although this one day may change. And fifth and the last point, pragmatism. In Poland, when the Civic Platform came to power in the year 2007, it wanted to become more European, to adopt a more European policies than its predecessors, so the Kaczyński brothers from Law and Justice. And what this more pragmatic, more European policy meant? It meant a reset with Russia. That didn't work really. It meant more interest in the economic gains, in the economic policies in the East. It meant less sentimentalism, history, and so on. I'm not very sure this is a real threat now with the war in the East. However, this pragmatism one day may come back. Certainly, and this was already mentioned, we see this pragmatism on the Ukrainian side. Poles have an impression with Poroshenko that Poroshenko is not really very interested in Poland. The talks in the Normandy format without Poland, that Ukraine is much more interested in Germany, seeing it as a big power, and that Ukraine tends to see Poland as a sort of, forgive me, as a sort of useful idiot who will always support Ukraine whatever happens. And of course, Poles are not very happy about this very pragmatic approach towards Poland. To sum up, if we have such challenges, what is to be done? Or at least some positive remarks at the end. What is to be done, or what are the conditions for our strategic partnership, for our cooperation? Several Polish experts would say it depends mainly on Ukraine. If Ukraine is able to reform itself, everything will be perfect. It will become closer to EU, and that's how our relations will improve. Well, of course, it's true, but it's not the only point. I think we need, of course, stable Ukraine, because if Ukraine remains unstable or becomes once again undemocratic, Polish-Ukrainian relations will become like, well, Italian-Libyan or French-Tunisian relations. I think we don't need that. You remember Komorowski in 2012 was the only president, together with Yanukovych and Lukashenko, who came to Kyiv for the final of the Euro 2012. I think we don't need such partnership, Komorowski, Yanukovych, and Lukashenko, okay? So of course we need stable and democratic Ukraine, but we need also stable Poland, because any political and economic problems in Poland will affect the Polish-Ukrainian project. And we need, finally, a stable and well-functioning EU, because if EU is weak, it will be unable, with Polish participation, to effectively help Ukraine. Thank you.